This is Gabriel Messuti, and you're listening to Learn, Unlearn, Optimize.
What's up, guys? It's Gabriel and Michael. We're back with our first podcast of 2020 after our break. And if you haven't heard what we did in the beginning of 2019, we're doing our best to try and release these every Monday. So go back and check out the feed for right now on Learn, Unlearn, Optimize. And where I really wanted to pick up with Michael, that where we left off, we were talking about proteins, and then we started talking about chlorophyll, and we started talking about the difference of how meat, there's people out there that will argue that fat can be used as a source of fuel, which it can be. Like the body can turn it into fuel, but the process, from what I understand, the process to do so is not as efficient as it is with carbohydrates. Is that accurate?
Well, I mean, under ideal circumstances, yeah. I mean, we're a carbohydrate or carbon-based life form, which I discussed previously, and we are designed to run on carbohydrates or glucose, breaking down to simple sugars, as our primary fuel. And when that becomes impaired because we're eating ultra-refined, processed refined carbs, sugars, isolated fractionated sugars, and we're getting all these other toxins that distress the organs, systems that are responsible for carbohydrate metabolism, then that can become impaired. And that's what we see in a lot of people nowadays. We're not being physically as active. So all those things are impaired. And now people are finding like, hey, well, let's go on a ketogenic diet where we're now shifting the metabolism over to a fatty acid metabolism instead of carbohydrate, and people are starting to feel good with that. Not all people, but some people are starting to feel better with that because now they're accessing another fuel that it's different. It's not the carbohydrate fuel because they can't process carbohydrates anymore in an efficient way. So they're finding another fuel is better. However, ideally, carbohydrates are the preferred fuel for the cells and tissues of the body. They burn the cleanest when they're in the proper whole food matrix form, and will keep us along and our life healthy and well.
So Mike, what I just heard was that the type of carbohydrates that we're eating, back to like our whole foods, eating whole foods, the type of carbohydrates that we're eating are fractions and are not very healthy. So we're not getting good energy from that. So when we switch to this keto diet or these fat diets, we're like, wow, we feel like we have so much more energy because the bar's been set so low with the crap that we're eating, with the fractions of food, so to speak, and sugars and things like that in the other carbohydrates. So now when we eat whole foods and the body breaks it down as it's meant to do, we should, or most likely will feel more energy with the right type of carbohydrates and the right combination of food than we would on an all-fat diet. So is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah, if we're able to get ourselves and our metabolism working with primarily a plant-based diet, which I'm particularly a proponent of, which is going to give us all the nutrients packaged in a whole food form. Mm-hmm. So you're getting primarily, these complex and somewhat simple carbohydrates that are metabolized efficiently because they're bounded to the essential vitamins and minerals, fatty acids and amino acids in there, and all their phytonutrients. It all gets metabolized very, very clean, very efficiently. But when we start shifting on over to, as we talked last time, about protein and amino acids, like those are the worst form of energy. They're not used for energy production. They're used for structure, for growth, maintenance, for healing, for regeneration of certain tissues and cells. So that's the most inefficient form for energy production and utilization. And then there's the fatty acids, which requires us to get our consumption of fatty acids to be really high and limit drastically the carbohydrate intake. That's the only way that you're going to get your body moving or metabolizing fats as opposed to carbohydrates, because your mitochondria, which are those energy producing factories within every single cell of our body. In order for them to produce energy, they need to choose either carbohydrates or fats as a primary fuel source. So if you want to do fatty acids, that means going on this ketogenic diet where we are limiting the carbohydrate intake significantly, substantially.
Mike, and is one of those processes of carbohydrates, choosing the fuel source, carbohydrates or fats, is one more efficient than the other when the body processes it?
Under ideal circumstances, how we evolved, carbohydrates are the preferred form. But because of a lot of chronic degenerative conditions, the systems that are in the mitochondria as well, that are stressed in terms of utilizing carbohydrates, where we have things like insulin resistance and blood sugar dyscrasias, where that's all being adversely affected, or the hormone system is being distressed, then we're like not using carbohydrates as efficiently. So we have to shift on over, we don't have to, but many people are finding that when they shift on over to a ketogenic diet, which we're using fats as the primary source, we're kind of bypassing that. And now that becomes a more efficient way. Okay. Only if you get it into a true like ketogenic type diet. If you're like in that state where it's like your system's running on carbohydrates, you haven't shifted over to fatty acid metabolism, but you're trying to increase your fat intake to try to go more fat metabolism, but it's not truly shifted over. It's not going to run efficiently, and you're going to run into many metabolic issues as a result.
Okay. And Mike, is keto, is that where that state of ketosis that they're talking about happens?
Yeah. So basically the way to know when you're in a ketogenic state is you have to measure your ketone bodies through your urinary output. And so you can go and get these little sticks, little ketone testing strips in any pharmacy store, online, etc., and test your urine, and then seeing if you're producing ketone bodies. And that will tell you, are you in a ketogenic state or not?
Mike, how does somebody decide which way they should go? So like under ideal circumstances, carbohydrates are the way, but for a list of different reasons that you just said, maybe you want to go towards this keto diet. How does someone decide which direction they should start going, and that's going to be optimal for themselves?
In my opinion, you need to work with a qualified health practitioner who understands.
Email Mike.
Thank you.
But no, for real, right? I mean, you got to get with a nutritionist, or like a health practitioner. Is it their primary doctor, or is it a nutritionist, or like what?
A practitioner who's qualified in nutritional biochemistry and understands that individual and what their needs are. And, short-term ketogenic diets could be beneficial for, again, short-term period of time, or we may not even need to go that direction. Maybe by supporting the biochemistry, changing the person's lifestyle, which is what I prefer to work with people, we can get them to use their carbohydrates, their glucose in a more efficient way.
So question, Mike, again, this is, guys, everyone listening, this is kind of like just a catch up, bunch of housekeeping and stuff that I wanted to talk with Mike about the last couple of weeks after we jumped off the other podcast. So listen to the other ones, and a lot of this, there's a lot of context there for what we're talking about. Mm-hmm. So Mike, with regards to the chlorophyll then, did the chlorophyll fall under our carbohydrate because we started talking about leafy greens, or was that under the proteins?
Well, no, chlorophyll is a completely other constituent. It's a phytochemical of plants.
Okay.
Plants that produce chlorophyll to basically take the sun energy and generate energy for that plant, and primarily in the form of, again, carbohydrates. Right. So it basically is like almost like it takes the solar energy and converts it into a chemical form. Right. For the plant.
When we were talking about carbohydrates, somehow we got on this topic of chlorophyll, and I can go back and
I forget the exact context of the chlorophyll.
But basically, you were like, eat a bunch of, if you want really great energy, eat a bunch of dark leafy greens and chlorophyll with your meal.
Yeah, well, chlorophyll is important for a number of things in our body, for blood building, blood stabilization. So if you
Yeah.
got any blood issues, anemias, chlorophyll is one of the best tonics for helping to normalize our own blood, because the hemoglobin that makes up um, our red blood cells is almost identical to the chlorophyll of plants. So it has a very, without getting too in depth into it, um, it is really important to help build up healthy blood. The chlorophyll, it's like the blood, so to speak, of the plant.
So why does chlorophyll help your oxygen level so much?
Why does because it has a very what's called hemostatic effect, or hemo meaning like, relating to the blood, the hemoglobin. It helps to build up the blood and helps our own blood cells carry oxygen, because that's what hemoglobin is it helps to carry oxygen within the red blood cell
Okay.
to all of the rest parts of the body, and so it's helpful in that way.
So hemoglobin's kind of like a raft for oxygen, so to speak, throughout the blood, and it's like a transport system. So the more,
Right.
now, I know you can overdo anything, but like can chlorophyll, buildup of chlorophyll become toxic in the body if you have too much?
Not when you're eating it from plants,
What about because I've been eating a ton of leafy greens and I've been doing that, so it's in its whole form, but I got some chlorophyll drops I've been putting in my water in the morning also.
No, there's no reported toxicities with something like that. In fact, chlorophyll is very protective of a lot of toxins, and so the body too, especially with our digestion, has an incredible degree of controlling what comes in and what stays out. So anybody who ever eats, let's say, high chlorophyll rich foods, especially things like spirulina, chlorella, any concentrated chlorophyll foods, they'll probably notice, at least initially, that their stool, their bowel movements will have a green tint to it.
Yeah.
And because your body will not absorb all of that in one shot. So the body has an incredible regulatory systems to control what comes in and what comes out.
Okay.
So though I wouldn't worry about that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. And then it also says, like, I was doing some research on it, that chlorophyll is great for your lungs. Is that because of the oxygen, what we just spoke about?
All of it, all of the systems, they help to neutralize a lot of toxins that are building up in our cells and tissues.
Yeah.
It helps to oxygenate the blood, to purify the blood.
Yeah.
But also all the other systems of the body. So again, wherever the blood flows, every cell tissue that gets fed by the blood,
Yeah.
so it's going to receive what's there. So if you help to fortify, nutrify, strengthen our blood, make it more much more healthy, then all the cells and tissues will receive that healthy, life force. And so that's what's great with the microscope, is that we can look at our blood and see qualitatively the state of the blood. Is it rich, abundant in hemoglobin? Are the red cells the right size, shape? Or how are the white blood cells doing? What is the terrain or the microenvironment of the blood as a whole? And if it's the environment of the blood, the microenvironment of the blood is healthy, well, all the cells and tissues of our body will be fed that healthy, life juice, so to speak.
Cool.
So, yeah, really cool stuff.
So Mike, with the chlorophyll and the carbohydrates,
yes.
is there how do chlorophyll and carbohydrates interact with each other? Is that a special or something like a relationship where the chlorophyll? So in other words, what I'm saying, the way I visualize the fuel source that you're talking about, you're going to either pick carbohydrates or fuel when we're on this subject right now. And so the way I was visualizing that was like, I'm going to either use like natural gas or oil for my home. Like, and I got to pick one, and then I got to switch my filters and my systems and my lines, and I have to optimize my home for that particular type of efficiency, that particular type of fuel. So when I do that, it does chlorophyll interact differently with one of those two systems, with the fats or is it like,
well, remember, this is a phytonutrient, so it's not used by our body as a primary fuel. So, and again, I want to get us to get back to the lipids as a fuel source, as a nutritional need.
Okay.
But chlorophyll is a phytonutrient that plants create, and that is used for taking in sunlight and allowing all the energy from the sun to be converted into a chemical form. Okay. And then generated into the carbs and fats for that plant. Okay. The amino acids and so forth. It's a whole cycle between what's coming from above and what's coming from below in the earth.
Is that the photosynthesis cycle?
Photosynthesis, exactly. Right. Exactly. Okay. But just keep in mind that, so as a phytonutrient, the chlorophyll will help purify, detoxify, keep all of our cells and tissues of our body in a healthier state. So if you got toxins, it's going to help to neutralize those toxins and help to eliminate those toxins. So it enhances the efficiency. It's also very what's called cytoprotective. So it helps protect our cells from those toxins and those stressors. Cool. And so there's a lot of good literature on chlorophyll in terms of protecting our cells from damage, from inflammation and oxidative stress, from preventing mutagenic alterations. So again, has an anti-cancer, so to speak, effect. But it's incredibly important in that regard. Okay. I don't know if I'm answering the question though.
No, I'm trying to draw the analogy for the lay person like that I am, and the people that are educating themselves on this. Mm-hmm. So if we have those two types of fuel, and the fuel is you have your fats and you have your natural gas, and that's like the fats and natural gas is similar to your oil or your propane or your natural gas heat that you're going to be running into your home. And then once that fuel comes in, that fuel is then fueling a system. And that system in this case is our organs and et cetera, things like that, and our bodies, our tissues, and it's all made of our cells. Like once we break down these different systems, fundamentally it's made of cells. So the fuel source is basically feeding these cells. The cells could be like your stove or your heating system or your air conditioner, your propane refrigerator, whatever it is, but it's made of cells. And then these cells then grab other things to work with after they have that fuel source that they're comprised of, and one of those is with chlorophyll.
I think you broke up for a bit.
So I said these cells they work then they work to do different things within the body based upon what they make up. And chlorophyll assists that process, not the initial fuel process that the cells actually run off of, but it assists the job that the cells do.
Yeah, and so do many other phytonutrients. Yeah, chlorophyll is just one of those.
Just one. So I guess, Mike, all right. So here after our recap right now, kind of just like that blatant kind of dumbed down analogy. Mm-hmm. Do we want to go into that, or do we want to go back into, what was it, lipids you said, or?
Well, yeah. So yeah, we had our talk about carbohydrates, talked about proteins.
Yeah.
Carbon, nitrogen cycle, how that's really important to understand that in our own metabolism and how we're connected to the earth in this whole cycle. Because again, once we break down, we decay,
we feed that
and
cycle.
Return to the earth. Yeah. We're supposed to be feeding that cycle and become part of the earth again. Yeah. To feed new life, and that's the whole life regeneration cycle. Yeah. It's all a recycling. Yeah. And so that's a sustainable system, and we need to do that. But now that we're got carbs, proteins, people are wondering about like what's up with the fats and the oils, which fall into this category of lipids. And lipids are the umbrella term for all these fatty acids, fats, oils, resins, and things of that nature.
Okay.
And so, we talked a little bit about this in terms of like as a fuel source and with the ketogenic diet. But before we like get into like that, I just want to like lay out what exactly are we talking about when we're talking about fats, like lipids. So again, lipids breaking down to fatty acids, oils. Those are the key compounds. But really, what are they made up of? Chemically speaking, it's really like sugars. They're made up of like carbon and hydrogen.
Mm-hmm.
Primarily, like that's what they're made up of. Fatty acids, lipids are carbon and hydrogen.
Mm-hmm.
So they can be, and they're arranged in certain chains. All right. So as free fatty acids, they're in a certain chain, and those chains can be short chains. They can be longer chains. The shorter chains, we call those oils because they are liquid at room temperature. And then fats, which are longer chain, are solid at room temperature. And so what will create a fat to be formed? Remember before we were talking about in previous talks about this whole idea of like electrical pressurization.
Yeah. Piezo.
So again, stressors and like the piezoelectrical effect.
Yeah.
That's part of that. So when any system, any organism is experiencing an accumulation of electrical pressurization, it's going to want to buffer and block and reroute that electrical pressure. And so what it does is it creates these lipids. And that's what lipids do. Lipids, they are there to create a buffer, to create a block so that electricity can't flow through. You think about the wiring, right? I love how we bring these things back to like real life examples, gross level examples. You look at wires in our homes and electrical, they're insulated because you need to create an insulation so that electrical
doesn't get
current
doesn't waste.
Can flow through where
Right.
it needs to go much more efficiently and not be leaking out.
Wow.
So that's what lipids are designed to do for every organism, whether it's a plant, whether it's a human being, or any other living organism. These fatty acids, these lipids are designed to create a protection.
Insulation.
And an insulation, and they help create structure. So when we think about every single one of our cells, they are made up of this lipid membrane. It's a bilipid membrane, which basically contains the fluids within a cell and separates it from the fluid outside of a cell, and helps to buffer what comes in, what comes out, the electrical pressurization. Otherwise, a cell would just completely dissolve and collapse. And oftentimes, like under extreme stressors, that's what happens. When you get, even on a gross level of an injury, and you get enough electrical pressurization, you create a damage to tissue. Especially if it could be a gross level of like literally like you take like an axe to your body, some type of trauma there, or even at a biochemical level of inflammation, oxidative stress that damages the cell membrane. If that cell membrane is not repaired and appropriately, the cell is going to collapse and die. So it's an extreme fat is important for protecting. Again, we talked about electrical currents with our wiring, the brain, and all the other, the central nervous system of the body is the neurons that make up that central nervous system of the nervous system as a whole. They are coated by fatty acids, by oils and fats, specific types of fats, of course, that are designed to protect that neuron and help to allow the electrical signals to be conducted in a more efficient way. And so we see in a lot of neurodegeneration conditions or neurodegenerative
lacking
conditions,
lipids.
You're dealing with a breakdown of those lipids, or those lipids are being destroyed in some way, and then there's electrical excess.
It's like a squirrel. It's like a squirrel chewing through your a wire in your attic, or it's like the plastic wearing off of one of your wires or the end of your headphones or your exactly like what happens. Yeah.
In order for me to hear you right, this has to be clean, and so this is protected. If not, if I brought a huge electromagnetic field to this wire that was able to infiltrate and overwhelm the electromagnetic field of this,
you'd have just a big. Yep.
Or it'd be completely destroyed.
That's right.
So everything comes down to this physics and the biophysics of electricity and electrical pressurization. And so this is like where fat is important. There's too much. The body or an organism gets too much electrical pressure coming. It's going to want to try to create these fat barriers, these protective barriers that serves both a structural, right? Again, we're talking about a cell membrane. It provides a structural effect or function, but then also a metabolic function as well, because a cell membrane is a really important place for a lot of biochemical processes to take place.
Mm-hmm.
So it plays a big role even in our body on a gross level. It plays a big role in the fat layers that we have, the adipose tissue. So the fat tissue of our body is used for, again, insulation, of course, but also plays a big role in hormonal effects, regulating our hormonal system in many ways, as well as an immune and inflammatory response as well. So that's super important to understand.
What if someone said to you, Mike, well, I have a friend, are they less susceptible to EMF radiation or something like that because they're 350 pounds, Right. Is that technically yes, because it has to go through more fat, that they're not as susceptible for the EMF to hit their vital organs, but they're just, their systems, it's overloaded in another section to where it's the balance.
So it's balance, right? So
and that doesn't necessarily mean that could be from the superficial level, but that doesn't necessarily mean inside that their wires aren't breaking down.
Yeah, so I mean, it all comes down to balance. And so you can look at a person, and if they're experiencing an overload of electrical pressurization, either their body's going to respond by producing excess fats to protect that. And so, again, there are many stages of fat accumulation, four main stages of fat, which I'll get into. But essentially, they're either going to put on a lot more fat to create a protection against that stimulation, or they're going to have an issue generating that protective response by generating more of a fatty protection. And then their systems are just going to be breaking down as a result. So you often see in a lot of more thin, frailer people who don't have those fat stores, they tend to be more agitated by many stressors. Their nervous system is a lot more agitated.
Interesting.
They might be a lot of hypersensitivity. They're restless, easily agitated.
Mike, so based on what you're saying, could being under electromagnetic stress, could weight gain be a byproduct of that because the body needs to adapt to protect yourself?
That's exactly what we're saying, is that
and then if you don't
being overweight is a result not always of you're eating too much, but that you are experiencing a tremendous amount of stressors that is creating these protective fat layers.
So the fat's a way to protect yourself.
So fat is a way to protect yourself from trauma, from stressors, from excess electrical pressurization, from excess radiation that is coming towards us in whatever form. And so there are these four stages of fat, creation, and they all have a special role. So we'll start with the first stage, which is of fat production, which is our simple fats and oils. So all the plants, they create them, we create them from eating, of course, certain fats from our food, but also we can generate them from an accumulation of, let's say, not accumulation, but as we discussed about carbohydrates, how get into fat storage. So they're they're created to perform several functions, including concentrating, storing energy, any excess energy, again, cushioning of cells and tissues. Again, from those excess pressures and stressors that we discussed, that can be toxins, that can be electromagnetic fields, it can be numerous types of, radiational forces that are acting upon us. But also plays a role in maintaining our body temperature, regulating body temperature, lubrication of our joints, lubrication of our tissues, also involved in packaging and protecting nutrients, especially like fat-soluble nutrients and vitamins, to deliver them, and also delivering other biochemical compounds that need to be in a lipid protection. So we often hear about cholesterol, right? Like, what is cholesterol? Like, these are basically lipid-based compounds that we call lipoproteins. So they're basically are carriers, these lipoproteins are carriers of proteins and other types of compounds that ride along with it. So that's like the first stage of like what fats and oils are designed to do, is to serve all those important metabolic and structural functions. Now, if we have a trauma, whether that is through a gross, blunt trauma to our body, we get banged up in any sort of way, or even a micro infiltration from a bacteria, a virus, a toxin,
Parasite.
Bodies. What's up?
I said parasite. Yeah, I'm just with you. Go ahead.
Yeah, whatever creates an attack or aggression upon our system.
Yeah.
What will happen is we may shift into a second stage fat barrier, which is an emergency fat, where it's only used for those acute, really crisis conditions, where we create this second stage fat barrier to dilute those toxins, to help surround those toxins, those organisms, to protect our system.
Like similar to like fascia buildup on a muscle or something like that. The fat will go internally to protect and like freeze what's going on.
Whether it's internal or external. So things like anything that pusses, that oozes. So think about pimples, acne around the skin.
Yeah.
We can consider that to be a second stage fat barrier.
Yeah.
So it's there to protect and to isolate and dilute and capture things that should not be in our system.
Got it.
And eventually, when the body has enough resources to break that down, it will come and break that down.
Got it.
Sometimes in certain conditions, like you get a wound, an open, you scrape your skin, what's going to happen? It's going to bleed initially, then you're going to start having some pus accumulation, which is important. And you want to have some of that there. And under certain types of, wounds, traumas on the skin, especially if we're talking, we can do certain debridement of that wound and make sure that pus, that ooze, that second stage fat barrier doesn't become too contaminated. Because again, it's all about controlling the microenvironment and making sure the microenvironment doesn't go to a state where now it is so unhealthy, where it's now poses another undue burden on your own system, where now your body is not controlling the microenvironment. The microenvironment becomes its own entity. So that's the second stage fat barrier, is that emergency acute fat infiltration.
Okay.
To deal with whatever trauma is happening.
Yeah.
All right. Then as we get to the third stage fat barrier, we know that if the body cannot deal with that trauma, whether that's the gross or micro level trauma, you're gonna have fat that becomes not so liquidy like the pus and ooze, but it's going to start solidifying. It's going to become a little bit more solid and helping to block off more infiltration, because it can't deal with that. It can't resolve that whole attack. So when we are infiltrated, your body to try to burn away and break down what should not be there and eliminate that, and then work on healing that tissue that's been damaged. But if it can't do that, if it's unable to resolve that inflammatory immune response, then what will happen is damage is going to start to be infiltrated with more harder fat. And so when we think about in terms of like our circulatory system and cholesterol and plaque formation, the lining of the blood vessels, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about too much damage to our endothelial lining of our blood vessels that has not been resolved, that's chronically inflamed and being damaged. And then the body's going to start to surrounded by these fatty infiltrations to say, you know what, I can't deal with this. I can't deal with this. It's taking too much drain on my system. Let me just patch it up with these fatty infiltrations. And that's your third stage.
So then it closes an artery, or like it just shuts it down. It's like, forget, this is taking too much of my energy. I can't deal. Seal it up, and we'll use the other three.
Yeah, well, it may not seal up the artery completely initially. Over time, it will do that when we get complete blocks. It's like a process. And so when we're in that third stage fat barrier, we're dealing with a chronic condition. Third stage fat barriers only occur under chronic distress. All right. And it's there to ultimately create a protection because there is a tremendous overload of electrical forces, whether that's coming from a toxin, a bacterial, viral infection, anything that's causing our defense system to act. And when we see people who are overweight, it's because they've reached into that chronic third stage fat barrier, where they have too much accumulation because their body is undertaking too much. And a lot of people get overreaching. Why? It's because oftentimes they're not eating right. They're eating too many of the wrong food stuff that is creating a tremendous amount of distress to their body, and the body will create third stage fat barrier to protect and ward off all of that distress. Will also start to accumulate and store a lot of those toxins.
Right.
Because you're not digesting well, you're taking in too many toxins from your diet, and your body can't deal with that. So it's going to start to protect that.
Yeah.
Put it into fat storage.
So Mike, so in those three stages, the first one that we were talking about, to where it's like from outside stressors and electromagnetic stress and things like that, it's going to start to build up in the stomach if you're super stressed, because the majority of like your vital organs are here. Yeah. Right. So it's going to like obviously the heart's above it and all that, and there's important things up here, but this is your trunk. So it's just your love handles, the back of the body, everything, like kidneys, all that, everything is going to just try to protect itself. So it's going to layer up fat to start.
Yeah,
and then
layering up fat of all the visceral organs.
Wow.
Which includes around your stomach, your pancreas, your liver. Liver becomes very, a lot of fatty infiltrations start to take root there. Fatty infiltrations, even to the heart. That's why if you look at people with cardiovascular disease is a main killer of people in the industrialized world, is because a lot of these toxins or electrical pressures coming from various sources are, again, mostly concentrating around our visceral organs, and they're building up in the blood vessels, they're building up in the actual heart muscle itself, in the liver, the kidneys, all these systems of our body. Some systems will take on more distress because it depends upon the individual. Again, constitutionally, maybe the person is born with a weaker cardiovascular system, or maybe their liver is a little bit weaker, or maybe they've experienced something in their life where certain types of stressors have an affinity for affecting one organ system over another.
Wow.
Maybe an organ system has remember our last talk we were talking about enzyme reserves. Yeah. Maybe there's certain organ system that has a much lower enzyme reserve, and so now it's not functioning in its proper in the most optimal way. So that's going to start to be distressed a lot more quicker than maybe another organ system of the body.
Wow.
Yeah. So that's that whole third stage, and then I haven't completed it yet, Gabriel.
Yeah.
I forgot about the fourth stage.
Yeah, waiting for it.
So fourth stage is that fat, that third stage fatty infiltration,
You die.
was solidified.
It just body kills itself.
Becomes hardened. Yes, hardened, stiff, calcified, and degenerative. So it's no longer living tissue. It becomes truly hardened and
So, Mike, is
calcified up.
this, when we say calcification, are we talking not like, is this the fats, are fats responsible, is basically as a body worker, right? Someone who deals with the body and movement.
Yeah.
I'm going right to thinking about like frozen shoulder, like fascia buildup. Like is this different than that?
That may be different. Yeah, that's often different. That's usually dealing with the actual connective tissue.
But but the
there
damage
could be calcification. But you're right. There could be calcification there. If there's chronic inflammation in that connective tissue of,
well, I'm
the
saying
muscles,
there's
the
cases
fascia.
to where like the muscles and fascia, scapulae, like I can post a video. I'll send it to you and I can post it also for people to see, Mike. But it's called the fuzz talk. And it's literally like one night's fuzz is more than 2 nights fuzz is more like a month's fuzz is then you get an injury and you never move your shoulder. And before you know it, you have no more range of motion because it's literally, you need to manually break it up with a
Yes.
body worker tool or on a cadaver with a scapula.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what you're dealing with.
I mean,
You're
with
dealing
what's
yeah.
a knife. Yeah.
Exactly. So that's what you're doing. You're dealing with that. You're dealing with that tissue that has become so damaged, inflamed, that cannot heal that appropriately, so that it starts to get into this third and then fourth stage fat barrier where it becomes hardened, calcified.
Amazing. Yeah.
And it's really once you're in there, it's very difficult to reverse that.
So
you can reverse it, but
it may not be the same thing as the muscle, Mike, but it sounds like it's the same end result. It sounds like calcification.
It is the same. It is the same. It may not be a gross level of fatty infiltration,
Right.
but that's because the amount of distress in that area, the accumulated electrical pressure in, let's say, that joint area or in that fascia, that connective tissue, was so intense and was intense for a significant amount of time that it went from a first stage to a fourth stage very quickly. And it went to a calcification process very quickly, rather than somebody who's, let's say, going through their life and they're not eating right, and then they have a little bit of fat accumulation, and it gets more fat accumulation, and then eventually it gets hardened to a fourth stage. Yeah. Like, let's say if you're talking about like, a chronic, fatty liver disease, where, again, the liver is a very regenerative organ. That process of it being, fatty liver and then becoming, the cirrhosis of the liver, where now that's a fourth stage fat barrier. That's something that takes, time to occur for most situations. But you can go from a first stage to a fourth stage in a relatively short period of time. And when you get that hardened calcified tissue, it's going to take a lot of effort in order to break that down. Sometimes that's often going to include some surgical intervention to help scrape it out, break it down. Yeah. Maybe even Mike, a lot of effort to undo that repair or undo that damage. But even when you go and you do that, whether it's through a surgical method, you're still going to it's never going to be back to its healthy state. There's going to still be some compromise of that organ or that tissue.
Mike, do they refer to fat like in the cancer world, stage 1, 2, 3, and 4? Is like this guy's got stage 4?
No, that's a different conversation, different staging.
So, but I know it's completely different. Like but what I'm saying is, will you diagnose or will you take when you take notes on this or say you're in this third stage of this fat development? Can you tell if a client's like in stage 1, 2, 3, or 4?
Anybody can. I mean, just if you look at a person and you're seeing they've got a big gut, right? They're at least a third stage fat barrier, right? Again, that fat accumulation, right? So they're at least there.
Yeah, I know with cancer, like one's like it breaks down from head to the bottom, but I was just saying like when you talk about it, like, would you say, okay, I have a client that's like stage 3 in their fat production right now, so I get to do XYZ for them, or this one's in stage 4 of their fat production. They need to go maybe have some manual things done. Like it's gotten so bad, and then I have to do X, Y, and Z for them.
Yeah. Ultimately, you got to work with a practitioner.
Yeah.
You know, to
no, I meant like you as a practitioner. Is that how sometimes you have to look at clients? Like,
yeah,
I have someone who's in a stage 4. They're going to need some manual work with this. They maybe need surgery, and then this is how we're going to start to reverse it from the inside out with nutrition or whatever the case may be.
Well, first thing you got to do is, my approach is, you got to stop or significantly reduce the stressors that are coming in that has generated that in the first place.
Yeah.
So you got to work on that first, and that's what I primarily focus on. But if, let's say, I see a client who has, you know, some system that is in a 4th stage where maybe that's impacting their quality of life,
yeah,
their motility, and maybe there is some type of surgical intervention.
Mike, what's motility?
The movement.
Mobility.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
That movement. So being able to, sometimes you might need to do that. So let's say, or especially if you're talking about, you know, a joint that has built up with so much calcification,
yeah,
right? Which is, you're dealing with that 4th stage.
Yeah.
Well, 3rd stage is really some of that calcification, that hardening, but let's say it gets into that 4th stage. You may need to kind of like debride that, get rid of some of that to help give the individual an opportunity to regain some mobility, some greater function over their organ systems.
Right.
But you can't do that for everything. If you got cirrhosis of the liver, you can't necessarily go in and take that out. Oftentimes people who have a cirrhotic liver, when it gets to a certain state, they are going to need an organ transplant. So literally taking out that organ and putting in another organ. Want to get there, you know? I mean, why put our body through so much distress and suffering? You know, in there, we can do so much to help ourselves to heal, to prevent degeneration and promote regeneration.
Yeah.
And that's why we're here having this conversation, and why you, the audience, are here.
Yeah.
Because you're interested in learning, how do I support this regenerative process and avoid my degeneration or the degenerative processes.
Mike, that was intense. So I'm gonna I think break this up for the audience listening and to talk to you right now, Mike. I think we'll break this up into 2 podcasts, one like a recap, and then the other one to start on the beginning of the fats conversation.
Yeah, next time we'll get into the exact types of fats, the oils, the lipids as a whole category, and talk about nutritionally what we want to be getting in from our diet and what sources we can get those fats, those oils from, and how they serve us.
Awesome. Mike, last question kind of on the EMF idea. Yeah. With all this talk of EMF, how is it then, and I'd like to hear it from you, that a far infrared sauna then becomes therapeutic or assists us if it's actual electricity? We're still sitting in electricity, or we're still sitting in frequency.
Yeah. Well, what you're getting from a far infrared is you're getting the far infrared spectrum of the electromagnetic spectrum.
Well, near, mid, and far in the infrared, but
you're getting that spectrum of the electromagnetic field, which is heat, infrared heat waves. And so it's that heat that's able to, go through the surface level of the body into a much deeper level to stimulate the body to sweat. And so by that internal of raising the internal body temperature, in a sense, you're creating a mini fever, or let's say not a mini fever, you're creating a fever. Internally, that is allowing your body to burn up, let's say, things that shouldn't be there, to sweat out toxins. It has a very incredible healing therapeutic potential. They just needs to be used in the appropriate way. There are people who overuse infrared saunas, or even going and doing sweat lodges.
Yeah. Hot
and
yoga.
Hot yoga. You overtax your body by getting it into this fever state
Constantly. Yeah.
Constantly. So to me, it's a therapeutic tool that should be used appropriately and not used just because it's something that has touted all these benefits. And that's the thing with anything, and why, the health industry as a whole is huge, and in many departments, whether it's supplements, whether it's infrared saunas, whether it's float spa, whether it's whatever it is, all these therapeutics, they all have their place, and we have to understand when is the right time and place to utilize these things, and not just say that this is the holy grail of our healing and go and do it like hardcore.
Yeah.
Maybe you need to use it hardcore for a certain period of time, but
because it perfectly offsets something else that you've been doing hardcore for too long. Like that's the yin to the yang. But then once you balance that out, you balance it out.
Again, balance.
Yeah.
Thank you for bringing it back.
I haven't been able to figure out how to overuse the float tank yet, though, other than if you don't,
sure.
other than if you like avoid your problems just by staying in there too long or something like that.
Yeah, no, floating is definitely something that,
like,
again, you can use, but the
it's
overuse
like sleeping.
Being in there would be like living in there for like 24/7. Like,
yeah,
that's overuse, but
right.
Going to use it on a daily basis for an hour, like, no, that's
the best, man.
Yeah, perfectly great.
Maybe 2 or 3. It's the greatest, man. Speaking of which, you got to come up and float, Mike, ASAP, bro.
Yeah, I'm going to schedule that real soon. Promise you.
Well, guys, listen, thank you so much. We're going to break this down into 2 or 3 little episodes here, and we'll be back next week with, for sure, the second episode on fats itself, on lipids and oils and getting it going.
Nutritionally and how it supports us.
Beautiful. Guys, thank you so much. Michael Pellegrino and Gabriel Messuti signing off. Peace, guys.
Peace.